In 1470, 23 nuns vanished into the heart of the Ottoman Empire. For centuries, historians thought they were just numbers in a ledger. They were wrong, and were the most dangerous prisoners the Sultan ever faced. Deep beneath the palace in Istanbul, a worker swings a sledgehammer in 2011. Dust chokes the air as the tired worker fixes a foundation. His hammer breaks through a stone wall, revealing a hidden void sealed away for centuries. He shines a flashlight into the space, and the beam hits something strange. The walls are covered in frantic scratches where someone used broken clay to carve tiny crosses next to a drawing of a bird. Underneath are ancient words saying the light shines in the darkness. Who carved these marks, and why were they hidden under the seat of a powerful empire? The answers lead to a forgotten nightmare of psychological warfare and the true story of 23 women who refused to vanish. So step into the dark and travel back in time. To understand these carvings, we must go back to 1453, when Sultan Mehmed II conquers Constantinople and destroys an ancient empire. But keeping the city is harder because the capital is damaged and empty streets do not pay taxes. He needs people to build his new world, so he creates a forced resettlement program called Surgum, where his armies march across the world, capturing thousands of artisans, merchants, farmers, and builders to march back and rebuild the capital. But the Sultan faces a problem because conquered people have stubborn memories of their kings, traditions, and gods. Mehmed realizes you cannot safely rule a population clinging to the past because dead martyrs inspire rebels and destroyed churches become sacred relics. So he needs a way to erase human identity completely. He strips people of their names and breaks their minds to make them obedient shells, because living ghosts are better for an empire than dead heroes. This becomes the standard Ottoman strategy, to make you forget who you are, as the war machine grinds across the map until reaching a mountain in Greece. In 1470, the war machine pushes into the mountains of Thessaly, where the convent of St. Catherine sits isolated on a high cliff. 23 women live here, posing no threat to the Sultan because they lack swords or armor and spend their days tending herb gardens and praying in strict discipline. 70-year-old Sister Theodoris is a survivor who has seen plagues wipe out towns and outlived emperors, fearing nothing. 19-year-old Sister Magdalena grew up on a farm until raiders killed her family, fleeing up the mountain for safety. Abbess Eleni is the leader who, before joining the convent, was a nurse treating plague victims until her village died. These women are cut off from the world and want nothing to do with politics or war, but the world is coming for them anyway. The sun barely rises when the nightmare begins, as an Ottoman cannon shakes the valley, smashing an iron ball into the bell tower. The bell explodes and rains shards on the herb garden, causing the terrified nuns to drop to the dirt. Abbess Eleni does not panic, standing in the dust to lift a crucifix and sing an old Greek prayer. The other 22 women slowly stand up and join her song, their voices cutting through the smoke. Soldiers smash the gates with axes and flood the courtyard, but instead of drawing swords to slaughter the women, a calculated horror begins. Soldiers act like accountants, using ink and scrolls to count the women, write down their ages, and inspect their health, because to the Ottoman state, these nuns are just property to be sorted and shipped. A local Greek translator steps forward, ashamed to read a royal decree, demanding they convert to the Sultan's faith to live in peace or suffer the wrath of the empire. Abbess Eleni steps up, staring him in the eye, and steadily tells him they serve a higher king with nothing left to give the Sultan. The Ottoman commander, Hassan Pasha, hears the translation and smiles instead of yelling or drawing his blade. Knowing how to handle religious captives, he orders his men to lock the nuns inside their chapel. The doors slam shut and the lock clicks, trapping the 23 women with no food or water in stone and darkness. Outside, soldiers set up camp to roast meat, letting the smell drift under the chapel doors, while they laugh and sing. They want the starving women to hear them enjoying life as a calculated psychological trick. Inside the chapel, panic sets in and two younger nuns cry as the suffocating heat turns the room into an oven. 19-year-old Magdalena whispers a comforting psalm, and other nuns join her until the crying stops. The commander underestimated his captives, who fast regularly and stay awake for freezing vigils, turning what soldiers call torture into their daily routine. 3 agonizing days pass in the summer heat, where the nuns' lips crack, their throats dry, and their stomachs twist in pain until some older women cannot stand. Finally, the doors swing open, blinding the women with sunlight, as a soldier walks in with fresh bread and cool water before leaving the tray on the floor. The younger nuns stare at the water, dying of thirst, but Sister Theodoris shakes her head, recognizing a mental trap to break their will with fake kindness, since accepting the water means accepting the Sultan's mercy. Abbess Eleni agrees, and they refuse the food and water, sitting back down in the dark to suffer together. On the 4th morning, Commander Hassan Pasha enters the chapel, shocked to find the food untouched and the women barely conscious. He offers a final deal through his translator, promising new names and comfortable lives in the capital if they say the words of conversion. He waits for an answer, but the room is silent, causing Hassan to sigh and give a final choice: to convert now or walk the brutal road to Constantinople, where the weak will die. Eleni looks at her starving sisters and turns to whisper that they will walk, making Hassan smirk at her pride. The next morning, the horror march begins as 23 weak women stumble out of the convent with tied hands, walking south toward the sea without horses or carts. The summer sun beats down on their uncovered heads, and dust chokes their lungs, while soldiers refrain from whipping them, letting the landscape do the dirty work. By the second day, 62-year-old Sister Irene collapses in the dirt, forcing Magdalena and another nun to drag her for 3 miles until Irene's heart gives out and she dies on the side of the road. The women dig a shallow grave with bleeding hands, while the soldiers write a note in their ledger that 22 remain. Days later, Sister Callista sits down on a rock and refuses to move, so the caravan leaves her behind to die alone in the hills, leaving only 18 women alive by the time they reach the port of Volos. The march changes the surviving women, who walk in silence and become numb to the pain. But Commander Hassan Pasha still needs to break their leader. Guards drag Abbas Eleni to his command tent, where what happens inside remains a historical mystery since records say nothing. However, a visiting Italian merchant wrote a letter about that night, watching soldiers bring Eleni back at dawn with her eyes wide open but the spark of life gone. The soldiers dressed her in expensive silk to parade her around the camp, mocking her and telling everyone she had converted. The merchants noticed Eleni's lips silently repeating Latin prayers, showing she had not surrendered her soul, even though the soldiers had broken her mind. The Ottomans did not want a dead martyr, and a broken woman in silk is a walking warning that fighting back is pointless. So Eleni walks the rest of the way to the boats, never speaking a word again. The 18 nuns are loaded onto an Ottoman war galley, where the bottom is filled with chained slaves called forcats, who row heavy oars day and night in an unbearable smell of sweat and sickness. The nuns are led into the belly of the ship and chained to wooden benches with iron rings, locking their bruised wrists in place. A 1470 cargo manifest lists them as 18 female religious captives destined for domestic service in the imperial household. The voyage takes 12 miserable days as storms toss the ship and freezing salt water blasts the deck. The mountain nuns have never been on a boat and are violently seasick, vomiting until their stomachs bleed while chains cut into their skin. Magdalena refuses to give up hope, whispering holy psalms every night in the dark hold. Her dry voice is weak, but other chained captives hear her words, with Greek merchants and captured soldiers leaning in to find hope in a floating hell. Finally, the journey ends as the galley sails into the Bosphorus Strait, where Constantinople rises in the distance with giant stone domes and minarets, serving only as a prison to the chained nuns. The women are marched off the docks and through crowded city streets where merchants and soldiers stop to point at the chained Christian nuns. The capital is full of noise as they walk past ancient walls and gardens to reach the Hagia Sophia, once the greatest Christian church, but now a working mosque. Islamic prayers ring out from its towers, while one old nun cries into her hands, whispering that they are finally home, but the home is gone. Guards lead them to Topkapi Palace, the sprawling home of the Sultan, but the dirty nuns do not enter the throne rooms. Instead, they are taken around the back and marched down steep stone stairs, deep underground, into a dark maze of tunnels, vaults, and damp cellars smelling of wet dirt and rot, built on Byzantine ruins. This is where the lowest servants live and die in a miserable world without sunlight. For months, the captive nuns live a dual life, acting as invisible slaves during the day, scrubbing floors until their hands bleed. They wash linen sheets in cold water and carry firewood for rooms they cannot enter, treated like ghosts by guards who beat them if they speak. At night, everything changes, because when the palace sleeps, the women sneak away into the oldest tunnels. They find a hidden room in the ancient foundations, sealed off from the working cellars. And here they build a secret world. They have no priest, Bible, or altar, making it work with only fading memories of the mountain convent. They use broken clay to hold stolen candle wax, a torn scrap of cloth as an altar cover, and broken glass to make a cross. They whisper Bible verses, share stolen bread for communion, and drink dirty water from a cracked cup before starting to carve the rock. Using sharp rocks and broken pottery, they scrape the stone walls with their remaining strength, carving tiny crosses into the rock with bleeding fingers as they refuse to stop. Sister Magdalena becomes their secret leader, and archaeologists believe she carved a simple bird on the wall as a symbol of spiritual freedom. Under the bird, she carved 23 lines for every nun from the mountain convent, but only 11 are finished. The other lines stop halfway down the rock to tell a heartbreaking story of the captive women slowly dying in the freezing tunnels from sickness and labor. Every time a sister died, Magdalena stopped carving her line. For hundreds of years, nobody knew about this hidden room, and historians thought the story of the captive nuns was a myth. Palace guards told ghost stories about hearing invisible women singing Latin in the cellars, but diplomats laughed and refused to believe Christian nuns could survive under the Sultan's nose. But the stones remembered the truth when in 2011, Turkish workers restoring the palace foundations accidentally knocked down a brick wall. Stepping into the forgotten room, they saw the tiny crosses, the carved bird, and the 23 lines. They also found words carved into the rock, a Latin phrase, lux in tenebris lucet, meaning the light shines in the darkness, next to a Greek phrase stating, we endure. Scientists tested the area and found ancient traces of beeswax mixed with mountain herbs, the exact type of wax nuns made in medieval days. This evidence proved the women kept their secret church going for a long time, returning night after night to scrape the walls and keep their faith alive under the Sultan's feet. Real history is often cruel, and in 1482, a new Sultan took charge to order a cleaning of the palace staff. Accountants wrote a new ledger listing old, sick, or useless servants, and next to the captive nuns, the clerk wrote a single word, disposed. That is the entire record with no marked graves, fair trials, or final words. The women who survived cannon fire, starvation, and the forced march vanished as the empire finally erased their bodies, throwing them away like broken tools. But the empire failed to erase their souls, because although Mehmed wanted to wipe out their identity, and thought his armies could destroy human memory, he was wrong. The Ottoman Empire collapsed in 1922, leaving the sultans dead and their laws as dusty paper in museums. But those frantic scratches on the basement wall remain today, left by captive women who had nothing else, losing their homes, friends, and freedom. They fought back with the only weapons they had left, a sharp rock and a stubborn mind, to carve their existence into the foundation of the empire that crushed them. They trusted someone in the future would find them, and hundreds of years later we did. Power can destroy cities, armies can burn towers, kings can rewrite history, and soldiers can chain wrists to benches. But power cannot conquer a determined mind. And you cannot erase people who refuse to be forgotten, because the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never put it out. If this forgotten tale moved you, please subscribe to History Echoes Hub to keep these memories alive.